It is the spring of 1945, and the war in Europe is collapsing in slow, thunderous echoes. The location is southern Germany, just days after American forces have overrun field hospitals once marked with Red Cross banners that no longer protect anyone. Inside these buildings, the smell of antiseptic mixes with smoke from distant artillery, and the low hum of generators vibrates through cracked stone walls. These hospitals were once orderly symbols of German medical discipline. Now they are silent, tense spaces where the rules of the old world no longer apply. Captured German nurses, women trained to serve the Reich, sworn to duty under Nazi authority, stand frozen as American soldiers escort them through unfamiliar corridors. Their boots echo on polished floors they did not build, beneath ceiling lights brighter than anything they have known during years of blackout conditions. Outside, the war still breathes heavily. Inside, something far more unsettling begins to unfold. They expect punishment. They expect humiliation. Many expect revenge. Instead, they are brought into American military hospitals, places they have been warned about through years of propaganda. Places described as chaotic, cruel, and indifferent to suffering. What they encounter defies everything they were taught. They see wounded enemy soldiers, treated without question. They see black and white American medics working side by side. They hear calm voices instead of shouted orders. And slowly, painfully, the first moment arrives without warning and without ceremony, the kind that history rarely marks but never forgets. The captured German nurses are moved through the hospital corridors not as symbols of surrender, but as bodies occupying space in an unfamiliar order. Their boots scrape lightly against floors, scrubbed so clean they reflect the overhead lights, a brightness that feels almost aggressive after years of dim wards, candlelit basements, and blackout curtains. They walk past doors swinging open and closed with soft mechanical precision, revealing rooms alive with motion, yet strangely calm. Stretchers glide instead of collide. Voices remain low, controlled, deliberate. There is urgency here, but not panic. For women accustomed to hospitals overwhelmed by shortages and chaos, this alone feels unsettling. The smells strike first. Sharp antiseptic, clean alcohol wipes, fresh cotton, and something faintly metallic from sterilized instruments. It is not the familiar stench of blood left too long on bandages, or the sour odor of unwashed bodies that had become normal in German facilities during the final years of the war. This air feels prepared, maintained, intentional. One nurse notices that her chest tightens, not from fear of violence, but from a sudden, quiet awareness that what she was told should not exist is standing right in front of her. They are guided into a treatment ward, and instinctively their eyes begin cataloging details the way trained nurses always do. IV bottles hang in orderly rows, clear and plentiful. Clean linens are folded at the foot of beds, replaced without hesitation when stained. Instruments are not reused carelessly, but passed into steel trays to be cleaned and sterilized again. Morphine is administered carefully, doses measured, not rationed down to desperation. For years, German nurses had been trained to conserve everything, to accept that some men would die simply because there was nothing left to give them. Here there is no visible scarcity. Patients arrive steadily. American soldiers, mud-stained and bleeding, are treated with the same efficiency as anyone else. Then something happens that stops several of the nurses mid-step. A German prisoner of war is brought in wounded, barely conscious. There is no pause, no discussion, no resentment in the room. He is placed on a table, cut out of his uniform, and treated as methodically as the man before him. The nurses exchange brief glances, their expressions tightening. They had been taught that enemy wounded were liabilities, burdens at best, disposable at worst. Yet here, hands move with the same care, voices remain just as calm. What disturbs them most is not kindness, but normalcy. No one announces moral superiority. No one lectures. The system simply operates, indifferent to ideology. An American doctor kneels beside a patient instead of barking orders from above. He speaks to the wounded man directly, explaining what he is about to do, even when the man is barely responsive. This act feels almost intimate, and to the nurses, strangely dangerous. It undermines the rigid hierarchy they were trained to accept, where authority was unquestioned and fear was a tool. Their training tells them to look for disorder, for incompetence, for proof that enemy medicine is inferior. Instead, they find structure without cruelty, discipline without humiliation, efficiency without brutality. Even the silence feels different here. It is not the heavy, suffocating quiet of despair, but a working silence, broken only by controlled instructions, the steady beep of equipment, the rustle of clean sheets. One nurse notices an American medic gently adjusting a pillow under a wounded soldier's head. It is a small gesture, insignificant in isolation, yet it lingers in her mind. Such care had become a luxury long abandoned in German hospitals, overwhelmed by ideology and shortage. Another nurse realizes that no one is shouting. No one is threatening punishment for mistakes. Errors are corrected quickly, professionally, without spectacle. The absence of fear as a motivator feels almost unreal. They stand along the wall at first, silent, stiff-backed, hands clasped tightly in front of them. Years of indoctrination keep them alert, waiting for mockery, waiting for degradation. It never comes. Instead, they are observed not as captives, but as trained personnel. An American officer gives a brief instruction. His tone is firm, but not cruel. When they hesitate, unsure whether they are allowed to move, he simply repeats himself, slower, clearer. The moment stretches uncomfortably, not because of danger, but because expectation collides with reality. As hours pass, their shock deepens. The wounded keep coming, yet the system does not collapse. Supplies continue to appear. Order holds. Even when the ward grows crowded, the rhythm remains steady. They notice that medical records are updated carefully, that every patient is tracked, named, accounted for. The German nurses had watched records dissolve into chaos as bombings intensified and staff vanished. Here, even in a war zone, documentation persists, as if memory itself is being defended. Emotion creeps in quietly, unwelcome and uninvited. Some nurses feel anger, not at the Americans, but at the deception that shaped their understanding of the world. Others feel shame, though they cannot yet articulate why. A few feel something more dangerous than either doubt. It settles heavily in the chest. Time inside the American hospital does not move the way it once did for the captured nurses. Days blur together under constant light, measured not by sirens or bombing raids, but by the rhythm of incoming casualties, scheduled procedures, and brief, controlled moments of rest. What began as observation turns, slowly and almost against their will, into involvement. They are no longer standing along the walls. They are handed instruments, asked to assist, expected to function as professionals. Each request chips away at the invisible barrier between captor and captive, replacing it with something far more unsettling: trust. At first, the nurses move mechanically, driven by habit rather than belief. Their hands know what to do, even when their minds resist the implications. They clean wounds, adjust IV lines, monitor breathing. Yet with every task, They notice how the American system absorbs them without suspicion. No one demands loyalty statements. No one questions their motives aloud. They are judged only by competence. This absence of ideological testing feels like a trap, and for days they wait for the moment when the mask will drop. It never does. What strikes them most is the diversity of the staff, something Nazi doctrine had warned them about endlessly. They see men of different backgrounds and skin colors working side by side with seamless coordination. African American medics issue instructions that white soldiers follow without hesitation. Authority here is not determined by race, but by role and experience. The nurses find themselves watching these interactions more closely than the surgeries themselves, trying to locate tension, resentment, or disorder. Instead, they see cooperation so ordinary that it appears invisible to those living within it. One moment in particular lingers. A black medic takes charge of a triage situation, directing stretcher bearers, assigning priorities, making rapid decisions under pressure. His voice is calm, confident, unchallenged. The German nurses feel a sharp, internal disorientation. Years of ideological training collapse into confusion. This image alone contradicts countless lectures, posters, and warnings. There is no forced display of equality here, no propaganda performance. It simply functions quietly, efficiently, without comment. The way patients are treated begins to erode deeper assumptions. Pain is acknowledged openly. Soldiers are spoken to as individuals, not as expendable units. Even under anesthesia, explanations are offered as if dignity itself is a form of medicine. One nurse watches as an American surgeon pauses during an operation to reassure a young German prisoner whose eyes are wide with fear. The surgeon speaks slowly, explaining each step, promising relief. The nurses expect indifference, perhaps even cruelty. Instead, they witness patience. That moment haunts them. Not because it is dramatic, but because it is ordinary. There is no grand gesture, no moral declaration. Just a human response in a place where ideology insisted none should exist. For some nurses, this quiet kindness feels more threatening than violence ever could. Violence would confirm what they were taught. Compassion forces them to question it. At night, sleep becomes difficult. The hospital does not go dark. Lights remain on, machines hum steadily, and the low sounds of pain drift through the corridors. The nurses lie awake, replaying scenes in their minds, searching for justification, for hidden motives. Some convince themselves it is all an act, a performance for appearances. Others cling to the idea that efficiency does not equal morality. Yet these explanations weaken with each passing day. They begin to notice how American staff speak about the war. There is no triumphalism, no constant invocation of ideology. Conversations revolve around logistics, medical challenges, letters from home. When victory is mentioned, it is spoken of with wariness rather than pride. The nurses had been conditioned to expect hatred. Instead, they encounter exhaustion. Participation deepens. They are trusted with increasingly complex tasks. Mistakes are corrected quickly, without anger. Feedback is direct, professional. This environment contrasts sharply with the fear-driven discipline they knew, where errors often resulted in punishment rather than improvement. Slowly, the nurses feel their posture change. Shoulders lower, movements become less rigid. It frightens them how quickly the body adapts when fear is removed. Internal conflict intensifies. Some nurses feel loyalty tearing at them, as if accepting this system is a betrayal of everything they were raised to serve. Others feel relief they cannot justify. A few feel resentment toward their own leaders, though they would never articulate it aloud. Ideology had promised order and superiority. Reality offers competence and care without slogans. The hospital becomes a mirror they cannot look away from. Each day reflects back question. The end does not arrive with celebration inside the hospital. There are no cheers, no flags raised in corridors, no speeches announcing victory. Instead, it comes quietly, almost gently, as if the building itself is reluctant to mark the moment. The fighting outside fades into distant echoes, and one morning the wounded stop arriving in waves. The nurses notice it first not through announcements, but through absence. Empty stretchers remain parked against the walls. Operating rooms stay unused for hours at a time. For women who have lived for years inside the constant rhythm of crisis, this silence feels heavier than noise. By now, the captured German nurses move through the hospital without the stiffness that once defined them. Their hands no longer tremble when they work. Their eyes no longer search constantly for threat. They have learned the routines, the expectations, the unspoken rules of a system that functions without fear as its foundation. Yet this comfort unsettles them more than captivity ever did. Comfort suggests acceptance, and acceptance feels dangerously close to betrayal. As news spreads that Germany has surrendered, reactions inside the hospital remain restrained. American staff absorb the information with exhaustion rather than triumph. Some pause briefly, leaning against walls, closing their eyes for a moment before returning to work. Others continue without comment, as if acknowledging victory would demand an emotional energy they no longer possess. The nurses watch closely, expecting celebration, perhaps even vindication. What they witness instead is relief tempered by grief. Too many beds have been filled for too long to make victory feel clean. The German nurses feel the weight of this moment differently. Surrender does not feel like an ending, it feels like exposure. The structure that once defined their identity has collapsed, leaving them suspended between past and future. They realize that the beliefs they carried into the hospital no longer align with the reality they have lived for weeks. This realization does not bring clarity. It brings uncertainty, and uncertainty feels dangerous in a world just emerging from total war. Some of the nurses will be released soon, told they may return home once arrangements are made. Others are informed they will remain temporarily, assisting with care for displaced civilians and wounded prisoners. The announcements are delivered calmly, without threat or accusation. No one lectures them about guilt or responsibility. This restraint is its own form of judgment, and it cuts deeper than punishment ever could. As they prepare for departure, they begin to process what they have witnessed. The hospital becomes a space of reckoning. They remember faces more than events. The young German soldier whose life was saved by an American surgeon, the exhausted medic who worked through the night without complaint, the quiet respect extended to them despite the uniforms they wore. These memories resist simplification. They do not allow easy moral categories. Years later, when some of these nurses speak about the war, they struggle to explain this period. They are not eager to praise their former enemies, nor are they willing to repeat the lies they once accepted. Instead, they speak hesitantly, carefully, choosing words that acknowledge complexity without offering absolution. They describe a system that worked, not because it claimed moral superiority, but because it refused to abandon basic human dignity. For many, the hospital becomes the moment they mark as the true end of the war in their minds. Not the surrender, not the collapse of Berlin, but the slow, undeniable confrontation with a reality that contradicted everything they were taught. They realized that ideology had demanded obedience at the cost of compassion, while the enemy they feared had preserved compassion as a form of discipline. The consequences of this realization unfold over decades. Some nurses carry guilt quietly, questioning their past choices in ways they never had before. Others channel their experience into post-war medical work, insisting on standards of care they once believed unnecessary. A few remain silent for most of their lives, unwilling to reopen wounds that never fully healed. But none forget. History rarely records these internal transformations. Official accounts focus on treaties, trials, and political reconstruction. Yet beneath those milestones lie countless personal reckonings, moments when individuals are forced to confront the gap between belief and reality. The captured German nurses experienced this reckoning not in courtrooms or re-education camps, but in hospital wards where suffering stripped away abstraction. In the end, what changed them was not kindness alone, nor competence, nor even mercy. It was consistency. The relentless, unremarkable consistency of a system that treated enemies as patients and patients as human beings. Under that steady light, ideology could not hide. It could not compete with evidence repeated day after day. When the nurses finally leave the hospital, some walking past guards whose rifles now hang loosely at their sides, they carry no slogans, no declarations. They carry memory, and memory once formed becomes impossible to silence. The war has ended on paper, but its deepest impact continues, reshaping lives in ways no battlefield victory ever could.